Yonda Pravisya Mamavachamima Suttam Sanjeeva Akhila Shakti Dharasudham Anyam Shahastacharana Sayam Turadi Pranam Bhagavad Gita Om Stavavaya Dharmasya Sarvadharma Sudhivaya Avatar Varishtaya Lakshmati. When we talk about common sense, we are talking about using what we know in our everyday activity, in our interaction with people, in our daily response to our environment. So those of you who are not familiar with the fundamental tenets of Advaita, just briefly for a minute. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Napara. This is a single statement from Shankaracharya. Means the absolute reality, Brahman, is only truth, and everything that we find are relative. This is the simple principle. During interaction, I can give the scriptural definitions of all the statements, but I'm coming straight to the subject from a layman's perspective. The first statement is quite obvious. Put in a monotheistic context, we can say God is only reality. Everything else is only relative, it's non-absolute or non-permanent in that sense. Now, what do we mean by saying that this world is mithya, the world is relative? In the ordinary translation, you find the world is a delusion, world is an illusion, world is unreal. This is what it means. Especially the word unreal in English can be very misleading. It can even attract the attention of a psychiatrist. If you tell him that the world is unreal, I don't think it makes any sense in the ordinary sense. So what the great teacher Shankaracharya meant by the word mithya is simple, non-permanent, non-absolute, non-everlasting. Something that we experience, we are part of it. We do connect, for example, this podium, this table, this chair, this hall, everything is real. Absolutely. Let's say, for example, this mic system that we are using, made of steel, perhaps. The steel was in the form of an iron ore long ago, before it became refined steel. Or this wooden chair, which was in the form of a big tree, maybe 10 years ago. And 200 years ago, it was in the form of a seed. The seed again was part of a tree 200 years ago. So you find tree and seed, iron ore and this mic system. Everything exists, but as such, they undergo changes. They don't remain the same without any change for all times. That's simple common sense. Now remember, interestingly, again, I want to draw your attention. I am dealing with all these topics very elaborately from a scriptural, canonical perspective in my lecture, The Foundation Text of Indian Philosophy. You find there are many, many scholars and philosophers in India who question this very often without fully understanding that mithya really means non-absolute, or what is subject to changes is called mithya. That's true. You don't claim you live like this for 1,000 years or billions of years. No. This world, this universe, the beginning, Big Bang, before Big Bang, this universe we are talking about was in a different form. And maybe after the big crunch, it will be in a different form. The world remains changing all the time. This changeability is the real meaning of mithya in Vedanta. This simple common sense. Now, come to our own everyday life. Suppose we get a medical report from a primary caretaker, from the Kaiser, of any medical agency. Your doctor tells you have got a health problem. If it is a very serious problem, that can, if you're 100 years old, maybe you're 900 years old, or 90 years old, of course. 90, if you're 90 years old, still you may expect that my body should remain the same for all time. But doctors won't agree with you. So doctors give you a paper which tells you have a serious problem. You may live maybe for 4 years, 5 years at the most. And you got shocked. Because in our mind, we anticipate, we want this body to remain all the time. But every child, every infant, every student going to primary school knows this simple fact: this body one day will disappear. Even, a crematory manager who flourishes because so many people die every day, he is not willing to accept that his body is perishable. I mean, he understands it because that's his own file, his own accounts show that if people are dying, that's why he's getting money all the time. But the point is, even he'll be shocked when he gets a medical report that he has a serious cancer. Why? Because somehow in his mind, the fact that his own body is going to be pushed through the tube one day, maybe after 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, he is not emotionally willing to accept that fact. That's why we feel we are shocked. Similarly, if you have put a lot of money in stock markets, you're watching the computer screen, suddenly you get a news that some stocks are collapsing and you are going to lose a lot of money, you're shocked. But you know that money is not meant to remain the same all the time. Stock markets are bound to collapse one day and again rebound again. Every human body is bound to disappear one day. Every human body has to evolve, change, get old and die. That is what human body is meant to be, supposed to be. This we know technically, but our mind, our emotional system doesn't make use of this knowledge. If our emotional system, if our mind could make use of this knowledge, there'd be no opportunity to get shocked, anything. So using what we know to manage our own emotions and feelings and mind, that is the real purpose of Vedanta. That is common sense. So simple Vedanta is truth, is basic truth, and it is common sense. Now, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya is what I mentioned earlier. So I also come to this subject a little bit. Why do we fail? Because somewhere at the heart of our mind, we have the feeling that we will live for all time. It is, remember, if you knew when you were a child, for example, a person who have gone through a lot of difficulties and eventually succeeded in life, business life. But the early stages, you have to go through a lot of difficult times. If that person had known earlier when he was growing up as a child, that he had to go through a lot of difficult times, then he won't have the courage, he won't have the strength to continue making effort and go through all these difficulties. He will be shocked. Again, if you are known when you are very young that one day you will become very successful, it is going to happen, then you won't make any effort. Then actually you are not going to succeed. So there is a kind of unpredictability, uncertainty, that is something beyond what we can predict and understand. That unknown factor, the basic uncertainty, unpredictability is one aspect of mithya or Advaita. Means we cannot really explain the absolute reality, indescribable, anirvachaniya, etc. So now I can come to this subject from another perspective. How this really becomes effective. You heard of Bhagavata Purana. Bhagavata Purana is the most important philosophical, devotional text in Vedantic tradition. It is written by Vyasa. It has got 18,000 verses, divided into 335 chapters, divided into 12 divisions, kanthas. You know how this book came to be written? There's a graphic example of somebody who made use of Advaita in real life. So the author of this book is Vyasa. Vyasa was one of the most accomplished philosophers, saints, and maybe the biggest author. If you make his contribution, you have seen this, you have heard of Vedas, there are 4 Vedas, Upanishads, all this. The entire text was one single book before Vyasa. Vyasa actually classified them into 4 divisions: Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, Atharvaveda. And these Vedas have their own divisions. Because Vyasa who did it. Vyasa Dhadu, means the Sanskrit root means to edit, to classify, to organize. That's really. So this Vyasa was a great author, great saint. Mahabharata, 18 Mahapuranas, 18 Upapuranas, everything is creation. Now this man was suffering from depression. That's the story. At the beginning of the Bhagavata text, there's a very interesting scene. Vyasa is sitting on the banks of river Saraswati. River Saraswati, modern geologists have found that disappeared due to some cataclysmic geological phenomena. The river disappeared and it's no more visible about 6,000 years ago. That's the latest finding of modern geologists. Vyasa was at that time sitting on this river, the living river at that time, the Himalayas. And then he was very much depressed. Remember, it's almost like a modern trillionaire, global CEO, with everything he can even think of, sitting somewhere in depressed mood. Or Vyasa was perhaps a very successful man in those times. So at that time, another sage came there, Narada. So Narada asked him, what's the matter with you? So Vyasa said, but somehow I've written Mahabharata, I've written so many other books, but I don't feel I have achieved anything. Then Narada asked him, what did you write in Mahabharata? So in Mahabharata, the central theme is dharma. And dharma in Mahabharata is something neutral. It's not a dharma as understood and defined by Buddhists. In Buddhism, dharma is a spiritual idea, supreme spiritual idea. But in Mahabharata, dharma is a kind of sense of duty, sense of obligation, what you are supposed to do. Every king, every person has his own dharma. In Mahabharata, there is also a big villain character, Duryodhana. He talks about his own understanding of dharma. So dharma is like a constitution. Constitution doesn't say what is moral, what is immoral. Constitution tell you what is constitutional, what is non-constitutional. What is constitutional may not be spiritually acceptable. So the constitutional morality is different from spirituality. Constitutional morality can even sometimes go against spiritual morality. So what Vyasa did in Mahabharata was giving importance to constitutional morality, dharma. So Narada told him, you wrote all this great book. Remember, in its larger version, it has got more than 100,000 verses. In its whatever is not popularly available, it has got about 120,000 verses, which is many times as the combined work of Homer and Virgil. If you put Iliad and Odyssey put together 13, 14 times, that is Mahabharata. Now, that's a huge work. And this is one of the works he wrote. Many other books he wrote. So Narada told him, you wrote wonderful things, but those books don't tell us what we need to do for our own spiritual progress. You didn't do that. You only said a king should king should function in a specific manner. A subject of a country at that time in a monarchy is not democracy at that time. A housewife, a householder, a son, a daughter, a putra dharma, nripa dharma, raja dharma, grihastha dharma. But it means, dharma for a king, dharma for a ruler, dharma for a minister, for a son, for a mother. Father, but you did not write anything specifically about what is needed for one's own individual spiritual progress. You write something, your depression will vanish. So Vyasa wrote Bhagavata Purana. This story. In that Bhagavata Purana, the beginning, you know how the story begins. There's a king. The king, his name is Parikshit. He was the grandson of Arjuna, one of the Pandavas, Mahabharata character. So this man was a famous monarch who was well known for his proper conduct, was a very kingly man in a very wonderful sense. But one day he was traveling, walking in the forest, and it so happened that he became very hungry and very thirsty. He entered a hermitage where a hermit was sitting in meditation. And he entered the hermitage and he found that the hermit didn't listen to him, didn't bother to get up and greet him. The king is coming. The hermit, the old sage, was immersed in meditation. So he got very angry. He went out of the hermitage. He took a dead snake, raised with his bow, and put in the neck of the sage. And he went this way. This, for the story, those who are interested, Shamika is the name of the sage. So Parikshit went away. After some time, this sage's disciple came. And they found his guru, his teacher, is sitting in meditation. There's a dead, stinking dead snake hanging on his neck. So that disciple, he also was a saintly man. He got very angry. So he put a curse on the man who had done it. Whoever it would be. He will die 7th day from now. So he has only 7 days to live. Now this report reached Parikshit, the man, the king who did that. The king did not get angry. He said, well, I did something wrong, and so I deserve this punishment. And therefore, I have only 7 days to live. So what should I do with these 7 days? He suddenly understood. The king understood. His ministers, his followers, his palace, his luxury, all this will one day disappear. Only 7 into 24 hours. Yes. So, till that moment, he thought his kingdom was eternal. He'll always be the king. He can always enjoy. He'll have wonderful things around. Everyone will obey him. Power, position, rich, very rich and very powerful and very much respected. Fame, name, everything one day disappear. Mithya. He understood. Remember one thing. This has got a very positive value in our everyday life. If we can work hard, put your money in stock markets, expecting a huge profit, we can start a startup. Still keep in mind, one day, even if I become a billionaire, that will disappear. If you remember that, you can smile all the time. Because if you can appreciate and understand the unpleasant, then nothing can really make you unhappy. If you can be aware that there is unhappiness, which is an integral part of life as much as happiness, coin cannot have just one side, just two sides. Then if you're ready for unhappiness, then you'll never be unhappy. So being aware of this possible unhappiness is common sense. But it means one day it is there, another day it won't be there. The king suddenly realized, think of the shock. In modern times, people may think if you have 7 days to live, you may go to Hawaii, withdraw all the money from the bank, buy a private jet, go everywhere. But that's not Vedantic common sense. So he's preparing for another life. Remember, from a Vedantic perspective, Death is only a semicolon, not a full stop. Death is not a full stop. See, if you have to go from here, if you want to go to New York and you have to change your flight in Houston, you won't feel depressed. Oh, what a problem. You take another flight from Houston and you reach New York. So, the reality of death need not be a shock to us because it is mithya. Means this physical body as well as the universe in which we are living, both are equally impermanent. The universe, a few billions of years, physical body maybe 100 years you may live. An insect for a few minutes, bacteria for a few seconds. But whatever it is, everything is within this time-space equation, time-space spectrum. That is mithya. Now, Parikshit, what he did, he straight away renounced his kingdom. He made his own son, Janamejaya, the next heir apparent. Then he went to the banks of river Ganga. In those days, it was a common practice for great kings and sages and householders to go and sit in the banks of river Ganga to meditate and then get ready for the next life. Actually, it is a very wonderful and intelligent way of putting money in the bank. Because if you put money in the bank, you expect the return tomorrow. You put your money in the spiritual bank, and next life you're born with a checkbook and fountain pen. Really speaking, that because every spiritual practice is like a huge check you're putting in your own bank account, only be withdrawn next life. So what Parikshit did, this body, this kingdom, this palace, all one day will disappear. Now let me see how I should spend the rest of my life, 7 days. And what he did, he went to river Ganga. The king was waiting. A number of sages have assembled. One of them was Shuka. Shuka is the teacher in this Bhagavata Purana. The whole story is in the form of a dialogue between Shuka and this king. When Shuka, the great philosopher, sage, came, Parikshit puts a question to him. Ata prachami samsiddhim yoginam paramam gurum purusasyeha yatkaryam mriyamanasya sarvata. It's a very famous question that is put by Parikshit to the great Shuka. Mriyamanasya yatkaryam. That's the essence of this verse. What should a dying man do when death is staring at him on his face? Mriyamanasya yatkaryam. Just think of it, 7 days to live, 7 into 24 hours. And he's a wise man. So he wants to spend his, I can tell you, if you are interested, it's a comparative literature. In Russian literature, there is a well-known book, The Idiot. I don't think in this modern high-tech age, anyone will be crazy enough to read such a great, marvelous work on Idiot of Fyodor Dostoevsky. But anyway, let's be, in Fyodor Dostoevsky's Idiot, there is a very wonderful scene. The story begins like this. Fyodor Dostoevsky himself was member of a forbidden banned organization. He was expelled to Siberia as a prisoner, and he had to spend some time, and eventually he was going to be executed. This is middle of 19th century, remember, during the time of this SARS times, long before this terrible revolution that happened. Middle of 19th century. Dostoevsky is writing on his own life. And there the firing squad and waiter were already assembled. They are about to be killed. Last moment, the king messenger came with a white flag and with a message of clemency, and all the prisoners were liberated. They were saved from death. And that had a terrible impact, a traumatic impact on Dostoevsky's mind. So he wrote this Idiot. This is an interesting scene. A convict is waiting for his time to be executed. So he found this long line. So he had only 10 minutes to go before death. So he thinks, what should I do for during the next 10 minutes. So he's thinking, well, first of all, long ago, I was a child, I threw a stone at a dog, I should not have done it. So I should mentally apologize to the dog. And again, he started thinking of whatever some wrong things must have done, he should apologize mentally. So I should be kind to everyone, I should be compassionate to everyone. He's getting ready for something higher to come in his next life. So you can see the interesting thing, the parallel. But in Parikshit's life, Parikshit's case, he knows that the death is only a comma and not a full stop. So he asked the question, what should a dying man do? The question continues, ye kartavyam, ye smartavyam, ye japyam, ye like bhajaniyam, etc. Ye sodavyam ado japyam, ye kartavyam viprabho, smartavyam bhajaniyam va ruhi yadva vipariyam. This is sloka. I have this unpleasant habit of quoting these verses because without these verses, it may just like talking about mindfulness without referring to let's say Satipatthana Sutta, which is the actual Pali source of mindfulness. So it will be sacrilege to talk about Parikshit quoting Bhagavata Purana, the sacred link connection with the ancient tradition. So Parikshit continued his question. How do I prepare to make my life more complete, to prepare for the eventuality? In response to this, Shuka tells him, first, he answers the later part of the question. The first part of the question is, what should I do? The later part is, what I should not do. So, Shuka first gives a long exposition of the essence of Advaita. He says, see, everything in this world comes and goes, but people don't keep this in mind. So they are not able to make use of it at the emotional level. Intellectually, we all know, and we can write a book on the subject. Absolutely. But in our own life, we are not able to make use of what we know at the emotional level. It becomes common sense only when you use at the emotional level what you know intellectually. This is a very important point. There's a difference between a real Advaitin Vedantin and an academic Vedantin. It is a wonderful thing to study Vedanta literature and philosophy, because instead of reading absolute trash, we are reading something very sublime that will make our life, mind and life more sublime. So any kind of reading, any spiritual book is a great thing to do. But that alone may not help us to translate our conviction into common sense. So Parikshit, who is putting this question, Shuka says one should try to make use of what he knows in real life. So he gives a long narration of how unfortunately most people don't remember this and how they waste their whole life thinking that this world, this wealth, this body and everything is eternal. This is the only thing we can have in this world. Or thinking that if these things will give us happiness and joy all time. Then he comes to the later part, the first part of the question. That is, Edavan Sankhya Yoga Abhyam Sudharma Parinishthaya Janma Labha Parapumsam Ante Narayanaspati. The actual benefit of spiritual common sense. What is this? Ante Narayanaspati. Leaving this world with a smile in your face, with a sense, the feeling that, well, I have done what I should have done. I have achieved what I should have achieved. Kritakritya and kritaknyata. Kritartha and kritaknyata means what you have attained, kritartha. Kritakritya means what you should have done, you have done it. Kritakrityata. Kritya means something that you should do. You are supposed to do. Krita. What you are supposed to do, you have done it. Kritartha means I have attained what I should have aspired to attain. That is kritartha. So one should leave this world in such a way that we should have a feeling, I have fulfilled, I have achieved, I have done what I should have. This is when this happens is Ante Narayana Smriti. At the last moment, you can think of God. Even if you are not a believer in God, if you be continuously doing something good for others, is all that I can do. You can have a smile on your face. If you go to hospitals, if you talk to doctors, nursing staff who are working with hospice, patients in the hospice section, you can find those who do not have any kind of ideal in their life and maybe spending all their lifetime talking about nihilism or atheism and a misconceived ideal of rationalism. Mostly they will have a lot of bitterness there, lot of well, whole life. They don't tell you because they don't want to tarnish their recognition, their reputation as a great atheist. But in their mind, they feel there's something, a nagging feeling of emptiness and incompleteness within. This is because they have not lived their life in a way that gives them a joy, a sense of achievement, real happiness. It's not an absence of unhappiness, real happiness. And this is possible only by keeping in mind the basic fundamental truth that everything in this world is non-eternal, perishable. Again, it's not a kind of negative philosophy, not a life-negating philosophy. People misunderstand. That's a misfortune. Mostly in these social media, everyone can write an article on Advaita. You can find in internet. A writer introduces himself, I'm a doctor. I'm writing a book on Vedanta. I'm an engineer. I shall tell you how to meditate. Now, there's nothing wrong on people keeping their hands close to everything. They can touch, handling anything. But the point is, very often this misconceived and misleading interpretations of Vedanta, saying that Advaita is something that negates the reality of life. Advaita is a totally negative philosophy. Advaita is world negating philosophy. No, Advaita only tells us what is obvious to every thinking, intelligent human being. We can work hard. In Hindu tradition, there are these four values: dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Dharma is the regulating principle. Moksha is the ultimate goal. Between this artha and kama, artha means what we want to achieve. If you want to get a good job, if you want to become a billionaire, okay. I'm using these terms because that's a current currency in modern time. That's why I'm using this. Normally, people think Advaita, Vedanta doesn't allow any ambitions. It doesn't permit any goals, any progress, or any achievement. It only tells you a world-negating, nihilistic philosophy, a world-negating, skeptical, cynical way of life. See, a cynical paradigm of life is totally wrong. Shankaracharya himself says, it's very interesting, he says, Prag Brahmatma Vijnana Sarva Loka Vyavaharanam Satyato Gupti Yatha Prag Supneseva Yadhathya means it. Prag Brahmatma Vijnana Sarva Loka Vyavaharanam Satyato Gupti Yadha Supnadushteseva Prag Prabodhat. It's a very important thing. But it says it. I'm quoting this fast because if you are interested, I can repeat again. The simple truth is, before you get the highest spiritual enlightenment, you should think this world is real. You should think you should achieve great things. You should work hard to achieve whatever you want. Shankaracharya says, it means that world, Advaita is not a world negating, life negating philosophy. It is a very positive philosophy. So he says, before you get or till you get Brahmajnanam, the highest spiritual liberation, you should live in this world such a life that the world is real. Wealth is real. You need all these things. Just as before you wake up from a dream objects are real. You understand that dream objects are only dream objects, only when you come out of dream. Till then, within dream objects are as real as objects are real in our waking state. Similarly, before you get the highest spiritual realization, you should assume that everything in this world is real as if, and work hard. But then when you get the spiritual common sense, when you realize the fact of impermanence of all these things, then you will realize, well, all these things are non-eternal. They come and go. And that actually will help us to deal with every problem in a very intelligent manner. Your close relative dies, or somebody whom you lived with now no longer. It should not give any pain to you, because that relative was not your relative in previous life. I tell you, there's a very interesting story again from Bhagavata Purana, Chitraketu, the king. A king and his wife, the queen, they had a son. And the son was a very brilliant man. When the king became very old, he made his son the next king, the next ruler. And the very day on which he was crowned to be the heir apparent, the prince dies. So what a shock it was. So the king, his wife, the queen, the boy's mother, father, the ministers, all of them became so grief-stricken. They began to cry and weep. They could not console. No one could console them. At that time, a sage comes there. You often find these interesting scenes in a Puranic literature. A sage suddenly appears when there is a problem. There's a discussion, mostly in the inferior courts. So philosophical idea goes back to those times. So the sage tells them, what's the matter? He said, the son died yesterday. The dead body is still there. But then the sage told him, that son was not your son in his previous life, or in your previous life, or in next life, he won't be your son and you won't be his parents. So why worry? But he could not console these parents. So they kept crying and weeping. This sage had some celestial miraculous powers. He brought him back to life. And the prince woke up as if from sleep. And the sage told him, see, look at your parents, they're crying and weeping, the ministers all around. Why don't you console them? Then the boy, the prince, who were actually dead, he said, which parents? I have so many parents, who huge line of parents in previous life cycles. So I don't recognize them anything special. So, of course, this idea may be vindicating the reality of doctrine of karma and reincarnation. But the sage made the king understand that human body, human life comes and goes. This fundamental impermanence or non-eternal nature, everything in this world is the cornerstone of Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta. It's also the most difficult part of it. Because we know it intellectually, but still we won't remember that when we are dealing with a real problem in our home, in the office, or anywhere else. So Shankaracharya says that this is one of the basic problems. And actually, in the Mahabharata, Yudhishthira, in answer to a question posed to him, he says, one of the most indescribable, one of the mysteries of human existence is every day, every minute, we are watching this happening in front of our eyes. People are born, people die. Things are coming into existence, they disappear. Still, we believe that we are going to live all the time. We are going to live the same manner. Our body, our home, our wealth, all these are going to remain without any change all the time. Intellectually, we know. Everyone is aware of this. But this awareness doesn't help us in confronting the problems that we face at the emotional level. That's the only difficulty. Don't think that anybody needs to be told that this world is changing all the time. Everyone knows. But how to make use of this at the emotional level? That is the essence of Advaita. We can do this only by constant thinking, reminding ourselves of what we already know. That is reminding ourselves of something that we already know. It's more difficult than learning something new. So I think a subject like this can be better dealt with through Q&A interaction. That would be a better way of discussing the subject. You are most welcome to ask questions.
Swamiji, pranam.
Yeah.
Swamiji, I actually listened to your Patanjali Yoga Sutra podcast. I learned a lot from that. Just I wanted to say thank you for that. My question is, from your earlier session, if this life and death cycle continues if you're not realized, and so the physical body will die and your consciousness will have a rebirth and a different body or something. What happens if you're realized? What happens to that consciousness?
Yeah. You see, I would like to avoid using the word consciousness. That is actually a very misleading translation. In many modern writings or serious writings, even Western authors, they would rather use Atman, a Brahman, because the word consciousness has its own limited meaning. And frequently it's a great injustice to a tradition. I can give an example. Suppose you translate Kant's Critique of Pure Reason into Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, Hindi, Bengali, or any language. It would be totally misleading. If you translate Aristotle into an Indian vernacular, it will be chaos, total disaster. Similarly, when you translate Vedantic text in English, the same thing is happening. It's a problem of language. Modern Western thinkers like Wittgenstein, many others have dealt with this problem. Language is a big problem in philosophy. So when you take this consciousness and this, what it means, even if you're Shankaracharya, he won't be able to recognize what you're talking about. But you're talking about his philosophy. I give an example. Anyone who has any doubt on this subject, I have seen this tendency, I'm sorry to say, among Indian so-called intellectuals to use consciousness. Very easily read Indian translations of Vedantic books, which are much more easy to understand, but they try to read English translations. Please, no offense meant. It's a problem. Swami Vivekananda did a wonderful work trying to make this point very, very clear. See, Swamiji's Jnana Yoga lecture, Swami Vivekananda's own exposition of Vedanta, it becomes so authentic because when he uses words like consciousness, he uses in its own limited sense as understood in psychology and not as a substitute for Atman and Brahman. He never uses that. It is as ridiculous as writing it, as translating Kant into an Indian vernacular. If you translate Kant into Indian vernacular or Hegel into Indian vernacular, and then it's a terrible massacre of Hegel and Kant. Similarly, when you use the word consciousness in place of Atman and Brahman, you're actually massacring Vedanta. No offense meant by that. So let us use the word Atman and Brahman. That will be safer. That's why in fact, in many of the Oriental conferences, many serious Western thinkers, of them, one of the most well-known one who has made supreme contribution to Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism is Hajime Nakamura. Wrote well-known book, on Tibetan Buddhism. He spent 40 years in writing his doctorate thesis, which he completed and he improved upon this. 2 huge volumes, the early Advaita Vedanta. And many of these great scholars, this Japanese scholar, was given Bharat Ratna by Indian government. My point is, they have drawn our attention to this problem. When you translate, frequently there's a problem. If you recognize that problem and translate, no problem. If you recognize there's a problem, then there's no problem. So the point is this, Instead of using the word Atman, don't use the word consciousness. Because it's a different limited meaning in Advaita Vedanta. I've been teaching for decades in modern English and also in Sanskrit. So I have done my best, even while talking to exclusively Western audience, they prefer that I use the word Atman and Brahman. Because suddenly consciousness, William James comes, Freud comes, just imagine what a travesty of the condition. In Advaita Vedanta, because you bring in this consciousness, totally wrong. So coming to subject. Now the point is, it's almost like when we reach a level of evolution where we realize that we are much more than this body mind complex. And then what happens is our identity with body mind complex, what you call or jiva, body, comes to an end. Then there is no more reincarnation. So it's something like, let's say, the reflection of sun on a pot filled with water. There'll be reflection of the sun at the water. Suppose you emptied the pot and broken the pot. Emptied the pot, you just remove the water and broken the pot. What happens is the sun reflection that was there in on the water disappears, but the sun above remains. So different pots and pans filled with water, with different or maybe thousands of 8 billion, let's say 8 billion reflections of the same Atman, the same sun. If they all become liberated, one Atman alone remains. So it is just like, or another example is a pot and a space within pot, the space outside, Mahakasha, Ghadaka. I'm not using the technical language. So if the pot is broken, the space, the limited space within the pot merges with the unlimited space outside the pot. There also you can imagine Atman is the better word to use than consciousness. The consciousness can mean awareness. Consciousness also can mean one of the terms used to define the undefinable. Consciousness supreme, knowledge supreme, bliss supreme, etc. But otherwise, the moment you bring consciousness, then all this, there's a galaxy of psychologists and psychiatrists, writers, who don't accept anything. All do you bring in? Then what kind of thing are you talking about? The problem arises. So subconscious and all that. That's why many modern writers and students, serious students talking about of Indian philosophy in America and Europe, especially the more evolved academics, they would rather use the word Atman. It is perfectly acceptable. Thing in itself is Kantian term. You bring in something else in its place. I don't know what it's called in German. I have no access to German language. I have access only to English language. But then they use the same term. But when you translate that into some kind of Indian vernacular, it becomes something else. It's a great disaster. Okay? So that's why it's very important. Thank you. Yeah.
There is a question on that, sorry.
Yeah.
Holy Mother in her last days mentioned to one of her disciple, everything is real, nothing is untrue. The master is all. He is Prakriti, he is Purusha.
Yeah.
And through him, you will achieve everything. But Shankara's Advaita Vedanta talks about world as unreal. How do we reconcile this?
That's why. So I come to that. When Shankara talks of the world is unreal, what it means is the world is not absolutely real. So I can explain this to you. In Shankara Vedanta, there are 4 levels of analyzing reality. One is the supreme, let's say, the non-definable, the indescribable, something that we cannot verbalize, something we cannot explain, we can only experience. That's why Advaita primarily is a matter of inner experience and not intellectual conviction. It's not a concept, it's not an idea, inner experience. So the absolute reality, when you name it, when you define it, when you explain it, it becomes limited. When you define anything, for your information, those who are interested in Christian tradition, Meister Eckhart says the Supreme Being is beyond the Holy Trinity. According to Eckhart, he talks about the non-definability of the Supreme. And outside of Shankaracharya, Advaita Vedanta, the one voice of Advaita that you hear is from Meister Eckhart. He lived in 13th century Germany, who actually was a Dominican priest who disappeared. Most probably he was killed, was called to Rome, he disappeared. And his theology, because it was not acceptable to the traditional church, the hierarchy, his name also disappeared, and eventually it got a revival thanks to Rudolf Otto's work in 19th century. So the absolute reality cannot be defined. If it is defined, it becomes definable. It becomes limited. It ceases to be infinite. We know that there is Vyavaharika. Paramarthika is absolute. Vyavaharika is the relative, the empirical. Your chair, your computer, yourself, this world, the galaxies, the stars, the Milky Way, everything. Bacteria, everything. Between the Vyavaharika, the empirical. What is the sign of the empirical? The characteristic of the empirical? It comes and goes. It may stay for billions of years, but still one day it disappears. Because it emerges, it comes from somewhere, it has to disappear into somewhere. So it is empirical, Vyavaharika, relative, Maya or Mithya. The third level of reality is Pratibhasika, conceptual. Just an idea that comes to your mind. For example, the classical example, suppose there is a semi-dark room, there's a snake lying on the floor, and you mistake it. Sorry, there's a rope lying on the floor. There's a rope lying on the floor, dark, curved, looks like a snake that you saw in the zoo the previous day or in the forest. So you mistake that rope for a snake, and you run away from the room. In the process, you break your neck, God forbid. An example, you go to doctor, and then you come back, you put on, switch on the light, it is only rope. The point is, he mistook the rope for a snake, and because of that, many things happened. You cannot say those things did not happen in the empirical world because you are going to doctor. But the point is, you are mistaking the rope for a snake is only conceptual. It's only in your mind. The snake is not there. The snake is in your mind. That's mind because of memory. Smriti Rupa Adhyasa. Smriti Rupa. It is in the form of memory. Because from your previous experience, which you remember in your mind, of seeing a snake, very similar to that object lying there, you superimposed the snake idea. Not snake idea on the rope. It is the third Pratibhasika. So Paramarthika, the absolute, the eternal, Vyavaharika, the empirical, and then conceptual, that is Pratibhasika. These are three levels of reality. There is something the opposite of it. A child is walking in the evening with his father. In the evening, sun rays fall on the clouds, the blue clouds with golden color. The child tells the father, there is a snake, there's a city up in the skies, Gandharva Nagara. Or there are other instances also. You mistake, for example, there's a pool of water, seeing sand is full of water. So, but these things are totally unreal. So the point is, absolute unreality called Asat, which contradicts itself. Vandhyaputra is one name. So all these are examples. The very word includes a statement that it is absolutely unreal. But the intellectual, the conceptual reality is there, not in the room, but in your mind, the snake idea. The empirical, all that we see empirical. Shankaracharya says it's a fact. Shankaracharya never says the world is unreal. Remember, when he says the word unreal, Pratibhasika, So Vyavakarika, etc. According to from the standpoint of Paramarthika, the Vyavakarika, Pradibhasika, and also the absolute unreality, the empirical, the conceptual, everything is equally unreal. But the point is, the empirical, the Vyavakarika exists. It exists, we experience it. Only we experience is relativity, its changeability, only when we are convinced of Brahman. Without that, you don't think of it as something changing. So when you realize the Vyavakarika, you cancel the Pradibhasika. When you realize Paramarthika, you cancel the Vyavakarika. See, for example, when you realize there is a rope only, your snake idea goes away. Similarly, when you realize Brahman, Vyavakarika goes away. It doesn't go away, it is transcended. It is not negated, it is transcended. A professor is teaching in Oxford or Harvard also will be using the same alphabet that you used when you went to your kindergarten. He has to use the same alphabet, English alphabet, for writing his thesis. Here, I won't use the language anymore, he can't say that. So that's another important point, remember. You should remember this. You know the greatest devotional poet of Sanskrit language? Shankaracharya. 138 marvelous poetical works Shankaracharya wrote. Even today, none of the bhakti teachers could write anything comparable to, you have heard about it. You just YouTube, you can play any one of the great the devotional points of Shankaracharya. You find you feel intellectually transformed. There are many who do that. You don't have to know the language to be influenced by that devotional fervor. So the highest devotee and the highest jnani are the same. I can conclude this by giving an example from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Then I will conclude. You see, in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, there is a marvelous scene. You may remember. Those who have read the Gospel may remember. You know, once it so happened that a great Paramahamsa is a wandering mystic, suppose, Advaita. He came to the Dakshineshwar. And he looked so unconventional, not taking bath, not well dressed, almost like an insane madman. And he had a small, tiny mango plant in his hand. He threw away, the plunged into the Ganga, did not wipe off water. Then he moved around the temple and he was sharing the food given to dogs and cats, you know. Now, anyone would have dismissed him as a madman. But there was a brilliant aura on his face. I mean, a transcendental look on his face. So Sri Ramakrishna told, this man is a Paramahamsa. So Hriday, his nephew, he asked Hriday to follow him. And that man tried to drive him away by throwing stones. But Hriday was a man of sterner stuff, so to speak. He followed him. And then that great mystic turned back and said, look here, when you don't see any difference between the holy Ganga water and the ditch water in the street canals, then only you realize the supreme truth. Surprisingly, if you want to see a similar vision, you can read The Way of a Pilgrim. He says autobiographical writings translated from Russian into English or French or somebody. The pilgrim continues his journey, the later part, The Way of a Pilgrim, the first part. The autobiographical writing by a peasant in mid-19th century. Its manuscript was found in Mount Etho, somewhere in Greece. And in that book, there is this humble peasant who learned the art of remaining in a state of perpetual prayerfulness. I mean, you automatically remain in a state of prayerfulness without any effort. When he realized that, he felt so much of inner joy, inner happiness everywhere. So my compassion for the entire creation. A similar scene is also in Bhagavata Purana. Little boy Prahlada, Sri Ramakrishna considered him as the greatest devotee. 5-year-old boy, whose father persecuted him for being a devotee of God. He was born as a great devotee. He could not think of anything other than God. He could not remain a moment without thinking of God. Every minute was for him being immersed in God's contemplation and thought. Prahlada also, you find in Prahlada's stories given, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying, sometimes, but every minute, Nityotsavam Bhavatyesham Nityasri Nityamangal. That is the real, the sublime, the peak of this Advaitic spiritual experience. That means every minute is an occasion for celebration. Every minute, every day is an occasion for jubilation, spiritual ecstasy. So Advaita has got two aspects. One is simple common sense understanding. Everything in this world is changing. So don't worry too much. Even if you eat organic food, do exercise every day, and still you cannot live for eternity. So everything is a matter of time. Secondly, there is one supreme truth that alone remains eternal. It's simple common sense we can apply anywhere, anytime. You need not be a Sanskrit scholar to be able to use Advaita common sense. The basic, common sense is much more difficult than brilliance or intelligence. Many of the most brilliant people did not have common sense. So I don't have to give the examples of the conclude. Thank you so much. Namaskar. Yeah.